This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Been looking forward to talking with Kyle Peterson from ESPN, former major leaguer and a member of the ESPN broadcast crew. Big league games, college games, Korean baseball games as well. I'll be on the call for tomorrow's Tennessee game here at Baum Walker. You're laughing there, Kay. You miss Korean baseball? Have you been waking up at 2 in the morning to watch some KBO games to bring back some memories?
No. Once we kind of got in the swing of it, I really enjoyed it. But, yeah, the 2:15 wake-up calls, I do not miss that.
Yeah. 7 o'clock first pitch in Central Time is a little more of my speed as well.
Yeah.
And you get to be at the ballpark this time. You call which of the game in the Ole Miss series were you calling? I know you were home for that game, but which one was it?
It was the last one, Game 3.
So that was Saturday, a close win for Arkansas. Give me your impressions of the Razorbacks, of what you've seen compared to some of the other SEC teams here, as we're more than halfway through the season.
Yeah, I think very impressive. Obviously, injuries on the mound, and I think this has happened, and it happened to everybody, but it's happened to most around the league, to where there's been one or two pretty significant injuries on the mound that have affected what ideally you want your rotation to be. But, I think that's, and probably moving forward, that's the biggest question, is just pitching depth from an Arkansas standpoint. But you get past that, man, and it's pretty complete. They pick it up, throw it first pretty darn good. The lineup has some length to it. There's a few guys that can run a little bit. I know that isn't necessarily the style that Dave plays, and he doesn't run a ton, but there's a few that can if you need them to. And then clearly the transfer component. When you're going leadoff 3-hole hitter that weren't there last year on a lineup that you did need to fill some holes, those guys have fit pretty well. Josenberger and Wagner, I've been extremely impressed with. You knew the power. Once Wagner got out of Charles Schwab Field, you knew that the power would jump up, because he was playing home games there before. But no, overall, I've been very impressed. I think they're actually maybe a little bit better from a record standpoint than I thought they would be this year.
Yeah, that's legit. 26-7. 8-4 in the Southeastern Conference, and the conference has been interesting because and so much of this has to do with who you've played. You got to win the games that are in front of you. South Carolina feels like a bit of a surprise. I don't know if I'd call Vanderbilt a surprise, but they've been dominant. Kentucky's been a surprise, and it's also surprising to see Tennessee come in with more losses than they had all of last year. And I don't think they were going to have that kind of season that they had last year, but it's not I don't think they're anywhere close to the juggernaut that they were last season, offensively and on the pitcher's mound.
No, you're right. But I think it's kind of two spots, right? Offensively, I think if you looked at what they had last year and what they have this year, I didn't think there was any way they could do that again, because of the pieces that they lost. Be it on the mound, they lose Joyce and they lose, a few bullpen pieces, but their entire rotation was back. And you go Dolander, Burns, and Beam, and coming into the season, I think you looked at that rotation as that's the best rotation in the country. Dolander's top 10 pick, Burns is top 10 pick, and Beam's a first rounder. Like, you get 3 big leaguers going on the weekend, and they've just been okay. They haven't been bad at all. They've been okay. Honestly, the best of the 3 has been Beam. He's really picked them up. The last 2 Sundays, they won Sunday at LSU and they won Sunday at home against Florida, and that's the only game that they won in those 2 series. So I think Beam is maybe the overlooked one in that rotation. He's probably thrown about the way that you thought he would. It just feels like the other 2 are due for a bounce, honestly. It feels like the other 2 are going to heat up, because history would tell us that's more who they are.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen this weekend. Yeah, not at all. This is an incredibly anticipated series. I'm doing the show today, Kyle, from the home radio booth at Baum. I see fans lined up on the street on Razorback Road to make sure they're first in line for the hog pen. Now, admittedly, some of those folks might be there for a Tuesday or Wednesday game too, but the line's a little bit longer than it would be for a Tuesday or Wednesday or even a Friday game because of who the opponent is. They've been looking forward to this series for 2 years. It's been an incredible amount of buildup. You're not going to see the fireworks between the head coaches that happened 2 years ago. But the fans here are coming to let Tennessee know what they think of them.
Yeah, I think that's been probably most places that Tennessee has gone this year. I had them down at LSU, and it was a little more raucous than it usually is down at LSU, and that's saying something.
Yes,
and it doesn't, obviously, given the history of it, it doesn't surprise me that that's going to be the same thing there. Obviously, the Tony component figures into it, but they were so good last year, and obviously they played with a swagger that was different than we're used to seeing in college baseball. And so when you get your shot, I think everybody's going to try to take it because everybody took the shots for the most part last year. And I think it makes everything more interesting. I mean, they're not the team they were last year, but yet they're still pretty darn good.
A villain is good in sports. Now, Tennessee fans obviously don't view their team that way, and they're not as boisterous, and nobody's flipping the bird going around first base like we saw last year, because that's going to get you ejected out of the game right now. But, I mean, there's been this conversation about, is Tennessee good or bad for college baseball because of the way that they show out? There is no such thing as a bad thing to bring attention to a sport. You might not like it, but people are talking about it. And I think Tennessee, I think their attitude, I don't agree with 25-foot bat flips and daddy coats and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it was bad for the game. I think it brought attention to a sport that quite honestly needs it sometimes.
I'm 100%. 100%. And I had the Super last year in Knoxville and done a fair amount of games at Tennessee over the last 10 to 15 years. I've never seen anything close to it. I mean, what it created, the other thing it created in Tennessee is I think it created, and this is good for the game, you go to the College World Series in 21. Last year, you're the number one team in the country, and there's no doubt about it until you get knocked off by a team that played as good as they possibly can for 2 straight days, and they got them. But the excitement and I think interest that it created, college baseball wide, but especially in Knoxville, leads to a new stadium. I mean, if Tennessee doesn't go to Omaha in 21, and if they don't have the year that they had last year, I don't think they're talking about putting $50 million into their stadium. And that's good for everybody in the league. I mean, the more that it grows, and South Carolina being good again is really good for the league. And it can be some new faces, but I think it is kind of the rising tide lifts all boats component to the league. It just happens that Arkansas is there every year. And so it's a little bit different. But for the others to jump up there, I think is a positive.
Kyle Peterson from ESPN joining us here. He is an Omaha native, still lives in Omaha, of course, the center of college baseball. And Jared Wagner's from not too far away, I think a couple hours away in Kearney. Of course, played at Creighton for 4 years, so he knows Charles Schwab Field really, really well. He's got a fractured thumb. It's a hairline fracture on his left thumb. It's the top knuckle. So it's a matter of how much pain he can deal with, is what Dave Van Horn said. And today's workout will have a lot to do to see whether or not he can play Friday or for the rest of the weekend. But they say he's got a good pain threshold. But a country boy from Kearney, Nebraska, man, I've known a few of those guys. They are tough. They don't feel a lot of pain.
Well, that's good. I learned something today, too. I had not seen that he had a hairline fracture on his thumb. But the other thing, I had him in the Little League World Series, too.
No kidding.
I haven't had him in college, but for the game the other day in Ole Miss. But, yeah, when Kearney made it to the Little League World Series, I had him for the first time out there. But it's still, I don't know. I mean, it's always kind of cool to see kids from Nebraska around the SEC. And Arkansas has had some. I mean, historically, there's been some that have come down there and had a good impact. But I'm glad that he's come down and done what he really can offensively, because he's real in the middle of the lineup.
Well, I mean, you got Cody Frank that transferred in from Nebraska, and unfortunately he's got that lat injury, so he's out for the season. But Josenberger's from Kansas City, Slavens is from Olathe. There's other players. Kendall Diggs is from Olathe. I mean, right now I think Arkansas is in a very interesting position compared to everybody else in the SEC. They are the kings of the Midwest. Nobody in the SEC scouts and recruits the Midwest like the Razorbacks do. And you just look at their roster over the last few years, man. I mean, that's one of the reasons that they've gotten to Omaha so often.
Well, I think some of that goes back to Dave's history in Nebraska, too. To where that's where he was recruiting. He was recruiting Kansas City. Obviously, he was recruiting the state of Nebraska. And so historically, there's a long line there. It didn't just start when he got to Arkansas. It goes all the way back to relationships and history and the way that he turned this program around. But Kansas City's always going to pump out dudes. Nebraska's not quite as big, but there's always going to be some up here. And even go back to the Jake Duggar days years ago.
Yeah.
Who still hits the golf ball a mile, by the way. But I don't know. There's kind of a hometown pride component to it, but it's always it's cool for me to see kids from Nebraska on rosters like Arkansas.
Yeah, Slavin's just tied Duggar for 10th all time in home runs at Arkansas with his 34th yesterday, which is pretty cool.
I'll let Jake know.
What's that?
I'll let him know he's going down. I'll let Jake know he's going down the list.
Yeah, pretty soon he won't be in the he won't be listed on the media guide any longer in the home run list. That's unfortunate for him. I got to ask you about the balls because there's this theory: home runs are way up in the SEC. Your counterpart at D1 Baseball, Kendall Rogers, is tweeting out the difference in home runs between this year and last year on a weekly basis. I've asked Dave Van Horn about it. He thinks the ball is a little bit firmer. I just seeing the exit velocities on our TrackMan that we get up here in the booth for games, there's something up with the ball. Some of the players have said maybe it's the bats. I think it's the ball. What do you think?
I think it's probably the ball. Yeah. I mean, they test all the bats, and the reality is I'm sure there's some bats that are hot too, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But I'm sure there's some bats that are hot too. But it does seem like the baseball, at least by what the offensive numbers are showing us, it does seem like the baseball's a little bit different. But I also think, too, I think as we continue to go on, and I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but offensive philosophy in college baseball is getting closer to offensive philosophy in Major League Baseball, to where they are looking to elevate the ball more than clearly 10 years ago when it wasn't going to go out. But I think some of that can be attributed to just offensively what you're trying to do. It's not always just take the ball back up the middle. There's guys that are trying to elevate it and run it out of the ballpark. So I think it all figures into what it is. I hope we don't get further down the road, though. I hope that next year we're not saying, well, home runs are up again 20% or whatever the number is, because we're going to inch closer to where we got in 98, and we're not that far away from it now, when the national championship game was 21-14. And if it gets to be to where it's a home run derby, then it's gone too far. I think we're okay now, but I hope it doesn't continue to go down this road. Right here is fine.
Who stands out, and we'll let you go with this, who stands out of the teams that you've seen that could be, I don't know if I'd call it like a dark horse, but like South Carolina's come out of nowhere. They're getting a first-place vote now. They've hit more homers than they did all of last year, and it's not a fluke. Is that a team that stands out? Because everyone wants to talk about LSU, with Skeens and Cruz and the rest of that team, and they're ranked number one. What about a team that's not ranked number one right now that's really caught your eye from what you've seen?
Florida's loaded. Florida is, and they're 3 or 4 or whatever it is. They're close, but you're right. I mean, everybody's talking about LSU. How about this? This is Ben Beatty sent this to me the other day, or Chuck Dunlap did. And maybe you've already heard this, but there's been 53 polls this year. So if you go back to preseason until now, and everybody that does polls, there's been a total of 53 polls. In those 53 polls, LSU has been number one 53 out of 53 times. But yet, if you started the SEC tournament today, LSU would be the 6th seed. It tells you what the league is. I mean, it's crazy because I don't think anybody's arguing whether or not LSU should be number one. They're 7-4 in the league,
Yeah,
and so I think there's a South Carolina argument for sure. There's got to be a Vanderbilt argument based on what they've seen because they've been a different offensive team since they got into the SEC. But for me, if I look at it all and say, if it's not LSU, Florida's pretty darn complete right now.
Get analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE to receive your bonus. That's BLEAV. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts.